Hi everyone, welcome to Funny Answers to Happy Questions. This is a show that I am currently workshopping for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this August. As of this recording, I cannot perform in front of a live audience, so if you have any comments you would like to make about how I can improve the show, what can be added, what you like, what you don't like, please let me know in the comments below. I appreciate it. The show itself is an experimentation. It's a mixture of stand-up comedy and a lecture. So it's for those of you who like TED Talks, but wish that they had more jokes and were a lot longer. My name is Ryan Wakefield, and I am a stand-up comedian, which for the record is a pretty sweet gig. Seriously, I get to travel around the world. I only work 1 hour a night. I get to drink on the job for free. And best of all, I get to make people laugh, which is like a weird superpower when you think about it. I can say things that make people have physical reactions that, among other things, release chemicals in their brains, making them happy. Yeah, that's what I do though. I make people happy. And I realize that is a weird way to describe my profession. It's suspiciously vague when you say it like that. Sounds like something a con man would say, or maybe a mobster. What do? Let's just say I make people happy. Yeah. Don't worry about how. Let me worry about how. You just worry about being happy. Okay? But today, I'm going to do more than just make you happy. Today, I'm going to take you on a deep dive into the science of happiness. And I'm going to try and answer every question you have ever thought to ask about happiness, and many that never even crossed your minds. From what happiness is, to its benefits and its limitations, how much happiness you have under your control and in what ways. For example, how much money do you need to be happy? Spoiler alert, probably more than you make. How much sex do you need to be happy? Not as much as you think, but still more than you're getting. What's the happiest number of kids, the happiest pets, the happiest religion, and most importantly, what can you do to make yourself happy, or at least happier? Basically, instead of just catching you a proverbial happiness fish like most comedians do, I'm also going to be teaching you how to fish, while at the same time giving a lecture on the anatomy of what makes a fish a fish. Now, before we get too far into this, I do want to acknowledge how weird it is for you to learn about happiness from a comedian. I mean, even though it is our job to make people happy, comedians aren't known for being very happy ourselves. Trust me, I know hundreds of comedians, and probably all but two are deeply disturbed individuals. Thankfully for you, though, one of the two who isn't is me. Yeah. The other one, in case you're wondering, is a guy named Kermit. Not the frog, the man. His name is Kermit Appeal, a very funny comedian, very happy comedian, too. He's really found his rainbow connection. The truth is, though, most comedians, like most people, are mostly happy at least most of the time. However, studies have shown comedians are much more likely than your average person to be lonely, anxious, or depressed. Not because our jobs make us this way, but rather people who are naturally lonely, anxious, or depressed are often attracted to stand-up comedy almost as a type of therapy. You see, at its heart, comedy is all about finding the bright side in a bad situation. There's even a famous saying that comedy equals tragedy plus time. Although, to be fair, that doesn't always add up. I mean, if it did, mathematically speaking, the bubonic plague would be hilarious. It does work, however, on a personal level, which is why nothing truly bad can ever happen to a stand-up comedian. It just gives us more material to work with. When I turned 30, I started losing my hair, but then I gained 20 new minutes of bald jokes. I know another guy who lost his toe to diabetes, turned it into his own Netflix special. Yeah, lucky guy. The point being is that all comedians use our careers to a certain degree in our own personal pursuit of happiness, even comedians who are already happy to begin with, like myself. And this brings us to the most common question people ask me when I try to talk to them about happiness. Why do you want to be happy? Yeah, it's a question that really challenges the notion that there are no stupid questions. I mean, come on. Why do I want to be happy? Well, kind of for the same reason that I don't want to feel pain. Yeah, that answer being, it is preferable to the alternative. Yeah, to many people, happiness isn't a question. It's the answer you give to why you do anything you do. Yeah, why do I dress up like a woman and play a round of golf in high heels? Well, because it makes me happy. You know, that or I lost a bet. I mean, to many people, happiness is the whole point of living. It's not everything, But I would argue a life, even a good life, without happiness is a bit of a missed opportunity. It's like going out for a gourmet meal when you have a head cold and you can't taste any of the food, or having sex without ever having an orgasm. You know, what a lot of women would probably call sex. Interesting side note, sex without an orgasm, the ending to every British porn. I'm kidding. I wouldn't know. I've never watched a British porn to the end. Now, all that being said, there are some legitimate criticisms about pursuing happiness, at least too aggressively. After all, a little sadness and discomfort can actually be a good thing. It can motivate you to improve your life. Even tragedy or sadness can be a source of inspiration for an artist, a musician, or a stand-up comedian. However, many of the most common complaints about happiness don't really hold up to scrutiny. One of the more common you hear is people say there's no point in trying to be happy because happiness is a fleeting emotion that doesn't last very long. And this is somewhat true. I mean, every fairy tale you ever read when you were a kid ended with the phrase, "and they lived happily ever after." And anyone who's been married can tell you, no, they did not. No, they lived happily ever for a week maybe, and then they got into a huge fight when Prince Charming left his underwear on the floor. Yeah, let's get this out of the way. No one is going to be happy all the time, forever, unless that person is a dog. Yeah, dogs are the only creature that can do that, probably because they can lick their own crotch. But just because happiness doesn't last doesn't mean you shouldn't try to be happy. That's like saying there's no point in eating if you're just going to get hungry again, or there's no point in taking a shower when eventually you're just going to start smelling. That is a very unhealthy way to live your life, not just for yourself, but for other people around you. Speaking of other people, another common complaint you hear about happiness is people feel guilty about trying to be happy when they know there are people out there who aren't happy, who are suffering or otherwise miserable. And this is especially true if you were, like myself, raised Catholic, with Catholic guilt. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know what that is, Catholic guilt basically says that if something makes you happy, well, you should feel bad about doing it. Now, because of this, there's a misconception that people who consider themselves happy must either be willingly or unwillingly ignorant to the sufferings of the world. But it turns out that idea itself is kind of ignorant. Studies show people who consider themselves happy experience about as much sadness, pain, and fear as other people. The difference is happy people are better able to process their emotions and move on with their lives, whereas sad people tend to linger on the negative and spiral downwards into depression. It also doesn't make sense to withhold your happiness on the grounds that other people aren't experiencing it. Happiness isn't a finite resource. It's not something you have to ration. Okay, everyone, only 3 smiles today. Yeah, don't waste them looking at a cute baby. No. Happiness grows and spreads with everyone it touches. Happy and sad people have been shown to influence the moods of other people around them. So if you really feel bad about other people, don't be sad, because that isn't helping anyone. And even if you take the emotional aspects out of being happy, there are still tons of benefits to living a happy life. Among the best is just how long of a life that is. Studies show the happiest people on average will live 10 to 20 years longer than people who are always grumpy or otherwise in a bad mood. Isn't that amazing? That's why every time I meet a jerk, I just think to myself, well, at least he'll be dead soon. Yeah, see, and that makes me happier, and then I live longer. You see how that works? It's like emotional judo. And that's just the start of the benefits to a happy life. Happy people are also more physically fit and are in better shape. They don't get sick as often, and when they do, they recover faster. They don't feel as much pain. They have more success in their chosen careers. They make more money, have more friends, more long-term lasting marriages, and they have a higher libido. They're practically superhuman, all powered by a positive attitude. Now, admittedly, there is a bit of a chicken and the egg dilemma when it comes to all of those benefits of a happy life. I mean, it could be true that happy people live longer, healthier, more successful lives, or maybe it's just that people who live long lives where they rarely get sick, don't feel a lot of pain, who have a lot of success, a lot of money, a lot of friends, and a lot of sex are just naturally going to be happier because their lives are freaking awesome. And you know what? Fair point. But as you'll find out, there's a lot of evidence that a happy and healthy, successful, meaningful life is a two-way street. Each would seem to benefit the other. And to understand why, we have to ask another seemingly obvious question: what is happiness? Now this one gets a little tricky. You could ask 1,000 people to define happiness, you get 1,000 different results. For example, Charles Schulz, the creator of Peanuts, famously said that happiness is a warm puppy. But then the Beatles came along and said that happiness is a warm gun. Ooh, two very similar yet very different answers. I mean, unless gun was the name of their puppy. From what we can tell, though, the origin of the word happiness has to do with luck. It's believed that early civilizations thought that happiness wasn't something you could achieve on your own. It was a blessing of the gods. And to assume that you could control it yourself was blasphemous. One of the first philosophers to actually suggest you could control your own happiness was the Greek philosopher Socrates, who taught that happiness was the result of human effort. And that idea was so unpopular, Socrates was accused of corrupting the minds of the youth and was sentenced to death. Thus, the pursuit of happiness got off to a bit of a rough start. Speaking of pursuit of happiness, that idea was coined by the English philosopher John Locke, who believed that happiness was God's way of encouraging us to be good people. Now, modern science has taken that idea a little bit further and now believe that happiness, at least as we know it, might be a side effect of evolution, as a way of encouraging our species to survive. The idea being that when we do something that helps our species survive, it makes us happy and encourages us to do those things again. So things like eating food, having sex, securing a nice place to live. Those are all things that help our species survive, and coincidentally are all things that bring either short-term pleasure or long-term satisfaction. Now, our brains accomplish this with chemicals called neurotransmitters. There's even a joke amongst neuroscientists that serotonin and dopamine are technically the only two things you enjoy. And that's because those are the most common types of neurotransmitters associated with feelings of happiness. They calm the brain and help it relax. Now, alternatively, your brain also makes a bunch of chemicals to stimulate yourself to respond to a threat. Things like adrenaline and cortisol. They're responsible for the fight or flight response you have. Now, in the short term, that's great. It helps you survive a threat. But when those stress hormones stay in your system for too long, they lead to increased stress, anxiety, and a weakened immune system. Hence, those are often referred to simply as stress hormones. So from a purely biochemical point of view, if you want to be happy, you need to increase your levels of serotonin and dopamine and then decrease your stress levels. But how easy is it to do that? Or to put it another way, how much of my happiness do I control? And the short answer is a bit, but not a lot. The general consensus is you control about 40% of your mood on a given day. So if you're having a bad day, that's at least a little bit on you. However, very little can be blamed on the day itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can have a bad day that isn't your fault. If you get fired from your job, or your dog dies, or you throw out your back trying a new move in the bedroom with your partner, you have a right to be grumpy. Alternatively, if you get a big promotion at work, or you win the lottery, or your partner pulls off that move with you, it's going to be a good day. The thing is, though, most days don't have those big emotional highs and lows, and most circumstances that happen to you will be forgotten within hours, if not minutes. Even major life events like a divorce have only been shown to impact your emotions for about 3 months, although the alimony payments will last a lifetime. And the reason for that is our brains get used to new stimulation and we don't notice it as much. So it's kind of like living next to train tracks and getting used to the sound of the train, except that in this case, the sound of the train is your failed marriage. Now, because of this hedonic adaptation, the circumstances of your life are only responsible for about 10% of your mood. That leaves 50% of your emotions to be blamed on genetics. So if you're the kind of person who likes to blame your parents for things, I have some good news. You can probably guess some people have better genetics than other people when it comes to happiness, which begs the question, who has the happy genes? Well, for starters, there is no one happy gene that you either have or don't have. There is a complicated hundreds, if not thousands, of genes that make the person you see when you look in the mirror. That's not to say some people don't have an advantage, though. About 20% of the population has an increased sensitivity to their emotions and the emotions of other people, and that helps them make less stressful, more meaningful lives. These are the people who have what we would call high emotional intelligence, or EQ. Now the question is then, where are these people living? Or in other words, what is the happiest place on the planet? According to the United Nations World Happiness Report, countries in Northern Europe as well as Scandinavia regularly rank among the happiest in the world, as along with Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, some scientists have argued that these countries are so happy because they share a common genetic identity centered on the Netherlands. However, other scientists have pointed out that that is kind of racist. I mean, admittedly, there is a bit of a sordid past with people from Northern Europe claiming to be genetically superior. Yes, all of those countries have a similar genetic identity, but they also have a lot of wealth, strong social programs, a lack of military conflict, and various other factors that contribute to their happiness a lot more than their genetics. So it's not really a matter of white superiority as it is white privilege. It's the same way how people who are genetically attractive or genetically intelligent are more likely to be happy. Not because of the genes that gave them those traits, but because of the doors that those traits opened, which allowed them to have a better life. When it comes down to it, studies have shown that genetic factors like race, sex, and sexual orientation don't have a significant impact on your happiness, provided that you live in a place that doesn't discriminate against you based on any of those factors. For example, in the United States, women are slightly happier than men in their youth. But as the two genders get older, men become happier than women. As Carrie Fisher once said, it's not that men age better than women, but rather they're allowed to age. All you really need to understand about this is your genetics sets your emotional cruise control, or what's called your happiness set point. This is how happy you can expect to be on any given day. The circumstances of that day might make you happier or sadder, but eventually you will return to that same happiness set point. The good news is that you can permanently change that happiness set point based on the choices that you make. This is the 40% of your happiness that is under your control and thus the most important to improving your life. And this just begs the question, how do you choose to be happy? And I'll answer that question in the second part of the show. Thanks again for watching. Please leave any comments below.